Some scholars have judged that Shakespeare had such insight into human thought and action that he demonstrated through his writing exactly how people do think and act. Previous to Shakespeare, characters in a play were written at such a surface level that they were almost like cardboard cutouts rather than real people. We hear the phrase, art imitates life. Harold Bloom, a Shakespeare scholar from Yale, says life imitates Shakespeare's art. That he actually had so much insight that he showed us how to be. Bloom wrote a book titled William Shakespeare, The Invention of the Human. How's that for hubris? Yeah. And apparently he's not alone in his judgment, because in 2000, you know how Time magazine has the person of the year and the person of the decade? In 2000, they had to come up with the person of the millennium. Well, can you imagine the competition for that? You have Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo and Isaac Newton and Madame Curie and Albert Einstein, Mother Teresa, hundreds and hundreds, and they decided that William Shakespeare was the most important person to humanity over the last 1,000 years. Talk about an endorsement. So, is he worth the effort? I rest my case. Evidence suggests that he is. So a good place to start with understanding Shakespeare, in my mind, was the sonnets, because after all, they're short. You know, they're 14 lines long. How hard can that be? I ought to be able to wrestle one of those to the ground in less than an hour, right? Didn't turn out quite that way. But I still think the sonnets are an excellent starting point. The sonnets also are unlike the plays in that they're kind of Shakespeare in real time. They're not fiction. They're not fictionalized history. They're windows to his mind, his thoughts about relationships, love, beauty, time, life and death, all the big issues. And the technique, one of the techniques that he used was to actually give inanimate objects life. The linguists call it anthropomorphism. Personification is probably more common. So if you see the word time with a capital T, that means time is now a person, a living, willful person who is making decisions about what to do. There's one phrase in one of the sonnets, time debateth with decay. So here we have these two willful personages, time and decay, who are having a conversation about what they're going to do to you. So I dug into the sonnets thinking I would get a little closer to Shakespeare. And I think maybe to begin with, we need to take a few minutes to look at the design of the classical English sonnet. Bear with me, the next 5 minutes or so is going to be a little bit like going to school. But let's get some facts out here. Boy, I shouldn't say that, should I? My daughter is a school principal and she's here and I'm saying it's like going to school. And I can't say it's like going to the dentist because my dentist, Graham Parkinson, is here too. So. Okay. The design of a sonnet. There are 14 lines long. That is called a iamb. It's pronounced ta-dum. And if you have 5 iambs, you have ta-dum, 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 ta-dum. Because there are 5, that's called iambic pentameter, which is one type of a scheme to use for poetry, and which was very familiar to and used a lot by Shakespeare. With the alternate line rhymes, A, B, A, B, that's the first quatrain because there are 4 lines. And we go on, and this is how all of the sonnets are built, with a different alternate line rhyme scheme. And I'll bet you can guess before I push the button that this is called the 3rd quatrain, right? Yeah, okay, yeah. And that leaves us 2 lines left over. So what do we do with them? Well, they rhyme with each other. They are called a couplet because they rhyme. They're quite often called a rhymed couplet. And that's the way he built his sonnets. Now, if you have this particular rhyme scheme and you have a simple little child's poem, you can pronounce it ba-dum, 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 ba-dum without doing any damage. A shaggy dog came running like a clown. About the time my mom came out the door, the grass was wet. He slipped and knocked her down. The dog was fine, but mom was bruised and sore. Try pronouncing Shakespeare with that kind of a deadly iambic pentameter. When in disgrace, the fortune and men's eyes, I all alone be weep, my outcast state. I think I rest my case at that point. Okay. So what you have to do is the iambic pentameter, the rhyme scheme, all of the structure of this sonnet floats over the top of the meaning like tectonic plates over the earth. And the real important thing is to deliver the meaning and let the rest of it subtly help hold everything together. Let me put a sonnet in here. This happens to be Sonnet 29. Take a look here. This is called enjambment, where the end of this line and the beginning of this line are part of the same thought. You would never say, like to the lark at break of day arising from sullen earth, because it's arising from sullen earth. So points like that, it's especially important to ignore the bumpty-dumpty-dum of it. So let me explain just a few things. Fortune and men's eyes, this is just to get around some of the language. Fortune means good luck. Men's eyes means what other people think of me. And with Shakespeare being a master of hyperbole, he's in disgrace. Well, what he really means is that he's not very lucky and other people don't think as much of him as he would like them to. Well, there's a familiar one. Useless cries. Featured like him. He's better looking than I am. I wish I looked like that. I wish I had friends like this guy has. Art and scope are the terms he used for skill and insight. And here we have happily, which looks like he was with a smile on his face. It really means by happenstance. I happened to think about you. And then we have the word state that comes twice, completely different meanings. This is the state of mind, and this one is the state of my circumstances. So let's listen to this sonnet now. When in disgrace, with fortune and men's eyes, I all alone beweep my outcast state, and trouble deaf heaven with my bootless cries, and look upon myself and curse my fate, wishing me like to one more rich in hope, featured like him with friends possessed, desiring this man's art and that man's scope, with what I most enjoy contented least. Yet in these thoughts, myself almost despising, haply I think on thee. And then my state, like to the lark at break of day arising from sullen earth, sings hymns at heaven's gate. For thy sweet love remembered, such wealth brings that then I scorn to change my state with kings. Thank you. I want to give you a few other sonnets. I've picked a few, and then I'm going to let you pick a few from this sheet here. I'm going to deliver 3 of them. I've picked for variation. The first one I'm going to start with here is the one with the most familiar first line of all sonnets, and that is, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Sonnet 18. His point is that all loveliness fades in time, and he starts out by ridiculing summer. He thinks if I take a beautiful summer day and compare you with that, now I'm really setting the bar high for you. But he talks about the problems with summer. Early on, it's too windy. And later, and then it doesn't last long enough. And then later it gets too hot, and then sometimes it's overcast, and all kinds of problems. And all of this stuff fades in time. But he says a ridiculous thing. He says, you will not fade. Your loveliness will not fade. It'll be there forever, even after you die. How ridiculous can you be? And then he actually backs it up with a couplet. Because in the couplet he says, you know why your loveliness will last forever? Because I'm writing about it, and posterity can keep reading about it and see your loveliness through my eyes. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease has all too short a date. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed. And every fair from fair sometimes declines by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest. Nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade, when in eternal lines to time thou growest. So long as men can breathe or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. A couple of interesting things there. He could have said the sun, but he calls it the eye of heaven. Those are the things that separate Shakespeare. And he could have said that what won't fade is your eternal beauty. No, he says your eternal summer, because that ties it back to his analogy with the summer. Every time you read it, you keep finding something. The next one I'm going to do, Sonnet 128, is from the very early stages of a relationship. I guess you would call it infatuation and flirting. One person I read calls this sonnet playfully erotic. It's not so much that you're going to have to cover any of the young people's ears. It's fairly... He's watching a young woman at the keyboard, and he talks about the wiry concord, which means the harmony's coming wiry, because that was before the piano was invented, and it was a harpsichord, and the wires are being plucked. He says that those sounds confound his ears, and all that is an implication that he's not really listening to that because he's paying too much attention watching her. And he never talks about the keys as keys. He says he's jealous of the keys because the keys are touching her, and he wants to be touching her. But he never calls them keys. He calls them wood, he calls them chips, and most prominently he calls them jacks. Now you might think that he didn't know the anatomy of the keyboard, because the jacks are the part of the operation back at the end of the keys that pluck the wires. But that's not really what it was. 400 years ago in England, a no-good bum who hangs around the street corners was known as a jack. So he's using jacks just to emphasize that I'm worth much more than the keys are. They're no good. You should be touching me. And he calls her my music. My music is playing music. How oft, when thou, my music, music playest upon that blessed wood whose motion sounds with thy sweet fingers, when thou gently swayest the wiry concord that mine ear confounds, do I envy those jacks that nimble leap to kiss the tender inward of thy hand, whilst my poor lips, which should that harvest reap, at the wood's boldness by thee blushing stand. To be so tickled, they would change their state and situation with those dancing chips, o'er whom thy fingers walk with gentle gait, making dead wood more blessed than living lips. Since saucy jacks so happy are in this, give them thy fingers, me, thy lips to kiss. This last one is actually a double sonnet. I'm going to glue 73 and 74 together because 73 is about the late years of his life, when he's feeling old and decrepit, and he says, you should love me all the more because there's not going to be that much time left that we'll have together. And he uses three analogies for his old age. One is as a tree at the end of the year with nearly all the leaves gone. Another is twilight, which is the end of the day. And the last one is a fire that is just about ready to burn out. 74, which follows it immediately, is after he's died. He's telling people how to think about him after he's gone. And he says, my body is relatively unimportant. What you really need to think about is what I've left, because it's my writing and my spirit that is left in that writing that is important. Instead of saying, when I've died, he says, when fell arrest without all bail shall carry me away. Let me explain that a little bit. Fell just meant quick. Maybe that's why it's called I fell, because it happens in a hurry. But fell meant suddenly, immediately. And arrest, of course, without all bail. It's like being arrested and put in jail and you have no bail. Once you get there, you're never going to get out. And that's what death is like. Did you find some interesting words there, ladies?
I think so.
Let me see what you found. Uh-huh. Yeah. Yep. Okay, we'll get to that in a minute. All right.
What? Okay, we'll get to that in a minute.
We'll get to that in a minute.
Okay.
So, 73 and 74. Oh, I need to explain another thing. When he's talking about the tree, he talks about the bare ruined choirs where late the sweet birds sang. He's talking about the limbs of the tree, which are wood, and choir used to be the front of the cathedral where the singers stood. It's spelled Q-U-E-O-R, and eventually the place the singers stood, the name for that place started becoming attributed to the singers. So we call a bunch of singers a choir, spelled with a C. But the choir is the wooden benches. So it's like his limbs as a tree are the wooden benches and the birds are the singers. And in a way, when you think about it, what he's doing is he's likening himself to a cathedral at that point. So 73 and 74. That time of year thou mayest in me behold, when yellow leaves, or none, or few, do hang upon those boughs which shake against the cold, bare ruined choirs where late the sweet birds sang. In me thou seest the twilight of such day as after sunset fadeth in the west, which by and by black night doth take away, death's second self that seals up all in rest. In me thou seest the glowing of such fire as its youth doth lie, as the deathbed whereon it must expire, consumed with that which it was nourished by. This thou perceivest, which makes thy love more strong, to love that well, which thou must leave ere long. But be contented. When that fell arrest without all bail shall carry me away, my life hath in this line still some interest, which for memorial with thee shall stay. When thou reviewest this, thou dost review the very part was consecrate to thee. The earth can have but earth, which is his due. My spirit is thine, the better part of me. So then, thou hast but lost the dregs of life, the prey of worms, my body being dead, the coward conquest of a wretch's knife, too base of thee to be remembered. The worth of that is that which it contains, and that is this. And this with thee remains. Interesting facts related to that is that he died when he was 52. So that doesn't seem like he was exactly in a decrepit state at that point. And the other thing is that as best scholars can figure, he probably wrote this when he was about 30 years old. So how's that for imagination, for being able to project and have insight into life that he hasn't even yet lived? Now, I gave copies of the King James Bible to Roberta and to Nancy. Let me tell you about this. When this Bible was put together, poets from all over England participated in it by King James' invitation. Shakespeare was not one of them, even though he was one of the most prominent poets. Nobody knows whether he was on the outs with the king or if what happened. But he was not. Someone planted in this Bible, apparently, a tribute to him. When this came out, he was 46 years old. And you go to Psalm 46, and I had them count down 46 words from the top, up 46 words from the beginning, or from the back. And from the top, we got the word
Shake.
And
Spear.
shake and spear. He was 46. It's Psalm 46. It's 46 words down, 46 words up. Shake, spear.
Spear.
Someone has to have planted that. That's a little too much to be coincidence.
Do you know who figured that out? Do you know
No, I don't. It's like,
so typical that period though, that playful.
yeah. It's like a 4th century telephone game that somebody tells someone tells somebody else, and eventually somebody told someone who told me, and now I'm telling you, and who knows? 200 years from now, somebody will still know it. But isn't it?
That's fascinating.
It's just amazing.
Wow.
It really is. Let's do this. This side can elect one sonnet, and this side elect one sonnet, and I'll do those too. 65.
54.
Oh. Interestingly enough, 54. Oh, 54 is... People used to ask me, what's your favorite sonnet? I'd say, I can't say that. And after living with them, I can. I have to say 54. I better put them. Pardon? Okay, 54, 30. Let me do 30 first. 30 was asked. Now, I'm not going to describe it because you have it all there. You've read about 30. If not, you have 10 seconds to read about 30. I call this a friendship sonnet. When, to the sessions of sweet, silent thought, I summon up remembrance of things past, I sigh the lack of many a things I sought, and with old woes, new wail my dear time's waste. Then can I drown an eye, unused to flow, for precious friends hid in death's dateless night, and weep afresh love's long since cancelled woes, and moan the expense of many a vanished sight. Then can I grieve at grievances foregone, and heavily from woe to woe tell o'er the sad account of fore-bemoaned moans, which I knew pay as if not paid before. But if the while I think on thee, dear friend, all losses are restored, and sorrows end. That is a beautiful one. That's a good job. Let me tell you about 54. It is so deeply philosophical. First of all, he uses the word sweet odor. That's because the word fragrance hadn't been invented yet. We say odor is bad and fragrance is good. I'm surprised he didn't invent it. He invented some 1,700 other words, but he didn't come up with fragrance, so he calls it a sweet odor. Canker blooms he uses. He doesn't say, he's comparing wild roses and cultivated roses. Instead of using those terms, he calls the wild roses canker blooms. Well, back then, it was common for people to get cold sores, and people would derisively call it a wild rose, because a wild rose was a red bloom that was out of control. He turns it around and calls a wild rose a canker bloom, which allows him to use just the word rose for the cultivated rose. Starting to think the guy's a genius. And it sounds like he's just comparing these two kinds of flowers, and then at the end, he talks about how roses last forever because they're distilled into perfume. So even after they've died, you can continue. And then you find out he's comparing the cultivated rose and the wild rose to people who have character and internal value and those who don't. And he's going to distill their internal quality in his writing, the person who he's writing to. Oh, how much more doth beauteous seem by that sweet ornament which truth doth give. The rose looks fair, but fairer we it deem for that sweet odor which doth in it live. The canker blooms have full as deep a dye as the perfumed tincture of the roses. Hang on such thorns, and play as wantonly when summer's breath their mashed buds discloses. But for their virtue, only is their show. They live unwooed and unrespected fade. Sweet roses do not so. Of their sweet deaths are sweetest odors made. And so of you, beauteous and lovely youth, when that shall fade, my verse distills your truth. Isn't that a great one?
Yep.
I want to say, any of you who are poets, you might want to try the sonnet format. It's an interesting challenge to write a sonnet. Later this year, I'll have a collection of my poetry coming out, and a few of them are in sonnet form, but in contemporary language. One of them I actually wrote using Shakespeare's language as well. It's one that I wrote to my wife for our 50th anniversary. And let me give you that one. So we'll have one more sonnet. This is well, I call this my counterfeit Shakespeare. Married, lo, these more than 50 years to thee, who art what only thou can be. Lived have I the sweetness and the tears that issue forth from moiling family. Adults from children all too quickly spring, my vision blurred, my mind as much did cloud. But joy abided always, joy that rang to save me from the disconsolate crowd. Go on. And yet, those years shall be again as mirrors which tomorrow's visions beam. Reflectors focused on a future lane where two as one shall cross nostalgia's stream. If from my past God granted leave to flee, decline I would, and live once more with thee. This is a fairly recent book. I bring it up only because it's one that I wrote, so this is the this is the commercial message now. It's available on Amazon.com. I volunteered to talk about Shakespeare to a high school English class. And then I found out after I'd volunteered that they have block scheduling. The classes are an hour and a half long, and this one started at 7:15. So I'm going to interest high school kids in Shakespeare sonnets for an hour and a half, starting at 7:15. We ran out of time. I could have been there all morning. And at one point, I said, you guys, always trying to get a girl's attention. Arguing my history class or some stupid line like that. So what if you were to say, if I could write the beauty of your eyes, and in fresh numbers number all your graces, the age to come would say, this poet lies. Such heavenly touches ne'er touched earthly faces. And one girl said to the girl next to her, oh, I always dreamt that somebody would come under my window and say something like that. I said, see guys, it works. Read Shakespeare.
That's fabulous. Fabulous.
Yeah. And then the girl who escorted me out of the building said, an important thing happened to me today. I said, what's that? She says, I've been on the fence between chemistry and English literature. What a couple of choices. I'm going to college. I didn't know whether to major in chemistry or English literature. I just decided English literature. I have to have more of this stuff. I thought, all right, that was worth coming for right there. This guy is one of my best endorsements of the book. He says, oops, what's going on here? He says, lo, thou canst at last understand with utter clarity that which I have inscribed onto this parchment. 'Tis Walter's book that makes all the difference. Thank you all for coming.